The Book of Revelation. Let's be honest, for a lot of us, just hearing the name brings up these images of, well, confusing symbols, crazy prophecies, and maybe it's all just a little intimidating. It's a book that can feel locked, you know? Like its real meaning is just out of reach. So you have to ask, is this maybe the most understood book ever written? I think it's a fair question. I mean, with all the dragons and beasts and bowls of judgment, it's so easy to get lost in the weeds and just completely miss the main point. A lot of people just end up avoiding it altogether.
But what if I told you it came with its own blueprint? What if the book itself actually gives you the key to understanding it all? A kind of decoder ring for its own structure and symbols. Well, guess what? It does. So let's use that key, dive right in, and map out a user's guide to the Book of Revelation.
All right, first things first, we need a roadmap. Before we get into any of the wild details, we've got to understand the book's basic structure. And the best place to start is, believe it or not, with the title itself.
See, the name Revelation isn't about hiding things. It's the exact opposite. It comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, which literally means an uncovering or a pulling back of the curtain. So right from the get-go, the book is telling us it wants to be understood. It's pulling back the curtain to show its original audience and us what's really going on behind the scenes of history.
And here it is, the blueprint, given directly in the text. In chapter 1, verse 19, Jesus tells John, the author, to write down 3 things. First, the things you have seen, which is that incredible vision of Christ in chapter 1. Second, the things which are, covering the present-day situation of the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. And third, the things which will take place after this, which is, the future, and that covers the rest of the book from chapter 4 all the way to the end. Past, present, future. It's the book's own table of contents. Simple as that.
Now, even with that outline, that whole future section can feel a little jumbled. So let's break down how the main story actually flows, because it's not just one continuous sprint to the end. It has a very specific rhythm to it.
So a great way to think about it is that the book has 2 kinds of chapters. You've got the chronological chapters. These are the ones that push the main timeline of events forward. But then you have these interval chapters, and they act like strategic pauses. They hit the brakes on the main story to give you these crucial close-ups on the characters and the events you're seeing. Understanding this rhythm is absolutely key to not getting lost. The main storyline itself is structured in these 3 cascading sets of 7 judgments. As you can see, it kicks off with 7 seals being opened. But watch what happens here. When the 7th seal is opened, it doesn't end the story. Nope. Instead, it unleashes the next series, the 7 trumpets. Then, the same pattern happens again. The 7th trumpet reveals the final, most intense series of all, the 7 bowls. So each set of judgments flows right out of the last one, building the story towards its ultimate climax.
But before all the judgments, before any of the letters to the churches, the book opens with the single most important image. Seriously, this is the key that unlocks everything else. A stunning, powerful vision of the resurrected Jesus Christ.
So the author, John, he's on this prison island called Patmos, and he hears a voice like a trumpet behind him. He turns around, and what he sees is so overwhelming, so powerful, it causes him to just fall down as if he were dead. Let's just read the description he gives us.
So John sees Jesus, but this is not the humble teacher from Galilee. This is the glorified sovereign king. His white hair signifies purity, wisdom, eternity. And his eyes, like a flame of fire, they see everything. They penetrate right to the heart of the matter.
His feet are glowing like polished bronze refined in a furnace, a symbol of unshakable strength and judgment. His voice isn't just one person talking. It has the power and authority of a thundering waterfall. And that sharp 2-edged sword coming from his mouth? We'll come back to that one, but it represents the power and the final judgment of his word.
Now, after this absolutely terrifying vision, Jesus puts his hand on John and reassures him. And this is such a crucial moment. He says, "Do not be afraid." He establishes exactly who he is and what his authority is. He has conquered death itself, and he holds the keys. He is in complete and total control. This vision really sets the tone for the entire book. No matter how chaotic things get, the one in charge is this powerful, risen Christ.
Okay, so we've got the structure and we have the central character. But what about all those bizarre symbols? The locusts with human heads, the 7-headed dragon? How are we supposed to decode all of that? Well, there's a simple, pretty grounded approach we can use.
This is really the starting point for everything. It's kind of a golden rule of interpretation.
Basically, don't immediately jump to some hidden, secret, symbolic meaning. Start with the most straightforward, ordinary, literal meaning. Take the text at its word, unless the context itself forces you to look for a different sense.
So if we apply that golden rule, the method is pretty simple. Step 1, start with the plain sense. Does it make sense literally? If not, okay, step 2 is check the immediate context. What's going on in that chapter? And step 3, which is absolutely crucial for Revelation, is to see if the book interprets its own symbols, which you'll find it does way more often than you might think. Let's see how this works.
Let's go back to that sharp, two-edged sword coming from Jesus' mouth. Now, our first thought might be to connect it to the book of Hebrews, where the Word of God is described as a two-edged sword that pierces our thoughts. And that's a great connection. But let's ask, what does Revelation itself do with this image? Well, later in chapter 19, that exact same sword is used to strike down the nations in judgment. So within the context of this specific book, the sword's main job is to be an instrument of Christ's perfect judgment. See how that works?
So, with the structure and the symbols starting to make more sense, we can finally ask the most important question of all. Why? Why was this book even written? I can promise you it wasn't to create some confusing puzzle. It was a real letter written to real people with a very, very specific purpose.
John wrote this letter to 7 specific churches in what we now call modern-day Turkey. And these weren't just abstract ideas. They were real people facing immense life-for-death pressure. They were being persecuted, they were being shut out of business, even threatened with death because they refused to worship the Roman emperor as a god. They were really, really struggling.
And this is the core message. Revelation was written to pull back that curtain and show these suffering Christians that the Roman Empire, which looked all-powerful, was not the ultimate authority. No, the one who was truly on the throne was that risen, glorified Christ from chapter 1. Their suffering was seen, and justice was on its way.
And this really gets to the book's central challenge and its incredible promise. The message from Jesus is so direct. Don't give in, endure, be faithful, even if it costs you everything. Because what's waiting for you on the other side of that faithfulness is the crown of life, a reward that makes all the temporary suffering pale in comparison. It was an unbelievably powerful message of hope.
So you see, Revelation wasn't primarily some secret code book about the distant future. It was an urgent survival guide for Christians in a moment of crisis, assuring them that no matter what, Jesus wins in the end. And that, well, that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? If the book's core message was about staying faithful in a world that seems completely out of control, what does that message of ultimate hope and endurance mean for us, right here, right now?